All right, super. So we're going to be zooming out and talking about privacy in general. Vitalik already quoted some of the wonderful stuff that he released in his article in April this year. And I want to focus on that, the importance of privacy. Why is so much of the Ethereum community focused on privacy right now? And essentially it's because privacy is the foundation of a free society. So Vitalik, the first thing I will ask is, why do you believe that privacy is a foundation of a free society?
I think, as I wrote in that post in April, right? Privacy is just something that you have to have if you want to be able to live any part of your life, for yourself, right? And not have to constantly worry about, how will this be perceived by, people you know personally? How will this be perceived by social media? How will this be perceived by one type of local government? How will it be perceived by foreign governments who have an ability to send a drone at you? How will it be perceived by your employer? And if we have to constantly think about all of those things from basically any kind of decision that we make, then it basically becomes almost impossible to live, right? And I think this kind of thinking, it can seem far away if you think you have the kind of ordinary life that doesn't really affect other people. But the reality is, you never know when, your life starts being perceived very differently by other people in the future, right? And so if we want to for people to just have personal space, for people to just have the ability to act to satisfy their own goals and their own needs, to think for themselves, then having that space where people can do that and not be judged by everything at the same time is just super important. And I think one of the big things that's happening in the last 100 years is that a lot of these barriers that we've just taken for granted this whole time, right? That conversations are private, that money is private, even that our own thoughts are private. Each and every one of those is being quickly eroded away, right? And I think if we want to keep that, then that's something that needs to be much more actively defended.
And one of the things that you summarized beautifully in your article was that idea that privacy isn't for the mainstream. Privacy is for anyone who diverges in any direction from the mainstream. And when you take into account all the possible directions you can diverge from the mainstream, it turns out that all of us need privacy for some part of our lives. And that really encompasses, the importance. And then that second pillar that you talked about was, the importance for order. And I kind of interpreted that as our society has all of these self-correcting mechanisms. We have whistleblowers and investigative journalists and protesters and dissidents. In order to push back in case authoritarianism gets too strong, we can have these self-correcting mechanisms to force that back in the other direction. But without privacy, we lose that.
Yeah, without privacy, basically, everything becomes subject to whatever are the most powerful incentives that are able to impose themselves. And sometimes that's money, and sometimes that's physical force. And in large quantities, either one of those two can just completely overwhelm, whatever the intrinsic goals that were originally meant to be guiding people who are participating in those kinds of activities, right? And so the whole thing, if you don't have privacy, basically just decays into a small number of powerful people and organizations having all of the influence, right? And so if we want to avoid that, then people making any kind of private decision. Journalism is a good example. Even just participating in creating culture of any kind is an example. Making decisions on behalf of an organization, voting, including voting on social media, all of these things. There has to be privacy if we don't want each and every one of those decisions to just be overwhelmed by the strongest forces that are trying to impose themselves.
Then the third pillar you talked about was about how we progress as a society. So the three pillars, you've got, the individual's right to do things without having to take into account all of the people around them. The second one is order, how do we maintain that self-correcting mechanism in society and push back? The third one is progress, the idea that there's a myriad of amazing data out there. We want to be able to use that to improve our lives. But the problem is that this data isn't just in some private contract with a company. They're not looking after this. They're usually selling this. They're harvesting more data about us. They're giving this to governments. And it becomes really hard to have progress and use this data to move society forward if that data is constantly at risk.
Yeah, I think, if you look at health, and even if you look at all of the various different schools of thought on health, whether you're looking at kind of Brian Johnson style longevity people, or people focused on pandemic prevention and clean air, or 1 of 5 other areas, one of the things that they agree on is if you want to get the best results, you just need to have data. You need to have data about people, and you need to have data about the environment, right? Because each and every one of us, each and every person is different. Each and every environment is different. You need to know what are the places where you have to intervene and where it's not, and on the other hand, places where there's no point in intervening. And basically, the whole scene has, I think, shifted over the last 15 years from giving these kind of universalized recommendations to basically asking, well, what is the situation of each individual person? Or if we're talking about cleaning the air, what is the situation in this room? And then knowing that is the first step to knowing what you need to improve, right? But then on the other hand, of course, any of that data, it's just so easy to underestimate the potential for totally dystopian privacy consequences, right? Literally, if you take CO2, right? If you look at the CO2 readings in your room, CO2 readings in your room, they can tell you whether or not people are in the room, when people are in the room, how many people are in the room, when people leave and enter the room, when people are doing different kinds of physical activities in the room. So, it reveals everything, right? And, same thing is true for, Fitbit data, basically everything. It's incredibly leaky, right? So this is one of those spaces where we, on the one hand, if we want a much healthier 21st century, we need to be able to unlock and use all of this data. But on the other hand, it just has to be done the right way from the start in terms of protecting the privacy and not revealing compromising information about each individual person, right? And I think the really nice thing is that with all of the different kinds of cryptography that are being built, including things like zero-knowledge proofs and including FHE, also including differential privacy noise, also even including some of the tooling that's being built to make this stuff secure so that people actually know what guarantees they're made. This is actually possible, right? But the traditional corporate world is not doing this by default, right? So we have to go and actually do it.
And there's another thing that you already talked about. When you say that these are things we took for granted, this actually makes this fight inordinately difficult, because for hundreds of years, we've just had this presumption of privacy in so many areas of our lives. And then it's slowly eroded. It's eroded in finance through things like the Bank Secrecy Act, the Ignacio Wiley Anti-Money Laundering Act, the Patriot Act. It just slowly disappeared and became taken for granted that every government agency gets access to all of our financial data and all of our choices, all the causes we support. And I think that frog in boiling water scenario has been dangerous to us. We've just slowly normalized this erosion of privacy. So now we're at this situation where we've never had, a history or a movement of fighting for privacy, because we've always just had it. So it's right now we're at this moment where we need to create this movement. We need to create a movement around fighting for privacy. We've never had to do this before, but now it's slowly gone. Everyone's taken it for granted. And this dystopia that you're pointing out that we are skyrocketing towards, we are hurtling towards, is very scary. So this is right now where we all need to rise up and create this movement. And I think that you've really lit the fire under this privacy movement.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be super, super important over the next quarter century, right? I think, the stakes are very high, right? the way these technologies are going to be built by default, and like even already, right, there was this paper in 2025 that you can basically turn Wi-Fi hotspots into surveillance cameras, right? Like the frontier in 10 years is they're going to want to read your mind. And so like those are the stakes, right? And like in a lot of ways, reading your mind is possible already, right? Like let's probably take an LLM, look at both of our faces, and probably determine, how many hours like we've been awake, and like what our emotions are, right? And like these are things you can do today. But then, like we have the other one is AI. Like AI is, I think, for more and more people, just intrinsically this. Not even just part of their workflow, but even part of their most personal thoughts, right? And these things can be done in a way that concentrates information and concentrates power of a very, very small number of people over the entire world, or they can be done in a way that is much more pro-human and that uplifts everyone. And I think we have to like really push and make that more positive outcome happen.
Absolutely. So let's look at the future, because a lot of people ask me, whether I'm an optimist or a pessimist when it comes to privacy. Obviously, we are hurtling towards a really dangerous direction. But for me, the good news is that it's our choice to head in that direction. If we don't want to head there, just build different technology. Just proliferate the amazing tools that already exist. And so, like, I look at the legislative front. I'm pretty scared about what's going on globally with the implementation and mandating of handing over an ID to use a web browser, which seems chilling. But on the tech side, for me, I've always been one who I didn't want to put my fate in, kowtowing to politicians to beg for the rights that should be mine. I think that tech is always the solution. So yes, we can fight that legal battle, but ultimately we have to build the technology that just gives people back our freedom. But then we have to use that technology, right? We actually have to, become part of these systems. So what's your take on the future? How do you see those two battles playing out? And are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Yeah, I mean, I think I view privacy technology the same way as I view something like solar power, right? Which is like the best thing that's happened to solar power this decade is like it's actually competitive purely on a commercial basis. Like even if tomorrow we all learned that global warming is fake and it doesn't matter whether the world's temperature goes up or down, even still, solar power would be the correct decision, right? And so, but getting to that state is something that took decades. Getting to that state is something that took many thousands of researchers and developers, huge amounts of capital, huge amounts of motivated and hardworking people, decades to incubate this technology and really push it through this early phase where it really depended on these people who really cared about the environment, really cared about creating a better future for everyone, and actually helped that technology grow up and get to the point where the cost curves went down and finally, it can fully stand on its own legs, right? And in a lot of ways, there are parts of privacy technology that are already in that position, right? Like HTTPS is mainstream, and HTTPS is a battle that we've won, and I think we can clap there, right? The Signal. Okay, let's clap for HTTPS. Round of applause. Yeah. Signal is a battle that we're winning. It's it's hard to say that Signal is just a tool for a few crazy people when famously, literally, the U.S. government is now using it. Basically every other privacy technology, we have to really nurture it and incubate it and push it through the exact same curve. And I think people like us, by being not just supporters in our voice and contributors with our code, but even also active users of these technologies as individuals and as a collective, is a really important part of that step, so we can push more and more things past the finish line.
And I think that we can't succumb to that I have nothing to hide mentality. If the people in this room are not the ones using these tools, no one is using these tools. And if you don't use it, you don't create that quorum and that network effect that leads other people to use it. So it's not about whether you have anything to hide. It's whether you want to live in a society where you no longer have the ability to make private choices. That's really what we're up against now. So I completely agree with Vitalik. Please use these things. Please implement them. And please don't default to the non private options, all right? You are the change makers here. You are the trailblazers. You are on the cutting edge of technology, and you have the power to affect change across the entire globe. So please lean into that power because we need you. So what are your parting words for how you think the people in this room can make the biggest difference as they go forward and make a better and more private future?
So first of all, who here thinks they have nothing to hide? Anyone raise your hand?
You are wrong.
See, zero hands raised. I mean, I'm kind of disappointed because I was gonna ask whoever raised their hand to stand up and take their clothes off. Like actually, yeah, you know, taking your clothes off reveals like 1,000 times less data that can be used against you than revealing your conversation history to Google or to Sam. But you know, that's another discussion, right? But basically, yeah, I think we here all understand the importance of this, and I think like now is really the era where we have to switch from just doing advocacy to really switch on like go into full gear on pushing these things into practice. And I think obviously if you're a developer, you can have obvious ways to contribute to that, but also if you're any other type of person, you can contribute to these technologies, you can spread the word, you can be a user. If you're a user, then actually the less technical you are, the better, because then you give feedback that actually aligns with what what's going to help the rest of the world use these things. If you're a lawyer, I think the political battles are also very important, and I think we should not underestimate the sheer number of allies we have and the sheer number of people who do not want the 5 most powerful people in countries in the world to see and control everything. We should not underestimate that even the over 99% of the world's governments are not superpowers, and they're interested in autonomy. And even huge numbers of people, and the ones that are. Also, people. Anyone working on UX is hugely important for privacy technology. So no matter what part of the, no matter what your skill set is, and no matter what area you're interested in, there are a lot of opportunities to really be active and contribute, and basically take an effort to make at least one extra privacy technology, something that you hear about today, from here on be a regular part of your life.
I love that. Well, Vitalik, you have really lit a fire under the privacy movement recently, and it's incredible. You're one of the most eloquent speakers about privacy. So please all follow Vitalik's lead, join him in this cause. And I think together we can make a huge difference and we can actually change the future. So thank you so much for everything you're doing. Thank you for galvanizing this crowd, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you.